Are we live? Did it happen?
And
we are live. Wow. Incredible. I'm always shocked, excited, surprised every time it happens. Feels like,
but we've got the good internet now. So
yes.
That's like very exciting.
It's really, I watched back the stream from last time. I mean, I didn't watch the whole thing, but I watched a little bit of it, and it was, I personally found my half of the screen unwatchable. So I apologize to everyone for that terrible experience that I subjected you to, but here we are now.
It was art.
Anyway, well, we are back again to discuss Paying the Price, Did college cost financial aid and the betrayal of the American dream. One of the things that I really love about nonfiction book club books is that we always have to begin with a description of what the book is, and it's just really
yeah.
You know what I mean?
The subtitle always tells you. Whenever I talk about nonfiction books on my channel, I'm like, here's the title, here's the subtitle, and then I'm like, wait, how do I explain what the book is? And I'm like, oh, but they did it for me.
Yeah.
they explained it.
They explained it, and now I'm gonna repeat myself. So anyway, this book is, I guess, to get into more than just the subtitle. They spent several years specifically studying a group of Pell Grant recipients in Wisconsin, and had a whole bunch of data. There were surveys, and all of the students who agreed to participate let the researchers dig into their financials and all of this stuff. And they were sort of, interviewing the students and reissuing these surveys repeatedly over, now I forget how many years, but five, I don't know, a while.
Yeah, it was at least 3 years in the study, and then they had some follow-ups too, because they were talking about when they couldn't get in contact too with some of the people, and that was much later than what I felt was in the actual main study as well.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Because the main study would have been it was 2008-ish, I think, when most of these students started their freshman year.
Which is also super important, because I was thinking about that, because those students started college a year below me, and so I was just thinking about it in terms of oh right, and they talk about this as well. It's the biggest thing is that this is when the recession hit, fully hit, and that's a factor that's sort of lingering. She doesn't really factor it in hardcore in the book, but it's obviously a factor, obviously in terms of if you're gonna have money, in terms of home equity, all of this kind of stuff, it is a huge thing. It kind of made me think of Planet Money. They always have they're and then the Great Depression hit, and then the Great Recession hit. It has that sort of thing lingering in the background, where there was just a lot going on financially and economically.
Yeah, if you're talking about money in this time for it's important to be to situate this in that way. It also matters because there were some legislative changes that happened the following year too. They sort of bring it up, so it is sort of a thing of the precise year that they were enrolled, that they started school, had a bunch of sort of implications, and I guess we'll get into this, I'm sure, as we discuss more, but less because starting in 2008 versus 2009 were these really pivotal moments, and more because of the ways in which all of this is so subject to the whims of the rules are now this, and then next year maybe there'll be something else, and who knows after that. So
and to be specific, this I feel the moment it's about experiments, I'm we need all of the nitty-gritty details, because they are important, but also I'm definitely going to forget all of them. I think some key traits are that they're studying students in Wisconsin, which I think has the lowest state support for colleges, and particularly for this kind of financial aid support. So that's a really important detail. And she delves into later the difference between some of the different schools as well in Wisconsin, funding for UW-Madison versus Milwaukee, and there's these other more city level differences in how this kind of funding gets distributed. The other big thing that I was thinking about when I was kind of going through my notes that is definitely specific to the study, and also specific to 2008. I think this was the first year they implemented this fund. This was fund for Wisconsin Scholars Grant.
Wisconsin
Yeah.
Scholars Grant. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Which is also like a huge, I think, nearly roughly half of the people in their like survey were also part recipient. I think it was like 40%, like just south of half, also received this additional grant. And that, I think, came actually a year later, because they talked about one person who like their like her aid changed. So I think the second year of this, and this was like, I think maybe the researchers knew that this grant was coming. Like it was like it had started, that it was like because she talks about it early on in the book. I don't really remember, but that studying that group of people was of particular interest too, just because of the way in which it was just like, just a straight up grant, here is money. Because that's the other thing the book talks a lot about, sort of the distinctions between kinds of financial aid and the way that we talk about different kinds of financial aid. And like, there were lots of things in here too that I, as a person who, had to go through the financial aid office to get, for multiple degrees, right? Like there were pieces of this that I was like, oh, like I knew this, and also I never really thought about it in these terms. Just, I don't know, like you just some of the interviews too, where like the ways in which the students were talking about like they call it financial aid, but it's a bunch of fucking loans. And I'm like, yes, that's true. I don't know. But the financial aid office said, here you go. And I said, okay, cool. This is what we will do to pay for school. I don't know. Anyway. Anyway,
I think another like, sorry, go on.
Oh, no, go ahead.
The other thing I was thinking about, and this is like related to, I think, that grant scholars thing. One of the things that I think is really important about this book is the focus from this research group is making sure that they're really talking about how financial aid affects people with the most need, because a lot of people need financial aid because college is fucking expensive. But the way that you're going to interact with financial aid is different depending on like what level of need you're at. And so she's focusing heavily on, and this carries over to other analysis that they have and how they speak about other works that other academics do about academia, which I was like, oh, this is getting a little bit circular. Academic like professors studying the system that pays them. But yeah, I think that's like a really, really important point about the point of this book, which is really to understand how does the financial system aid, how does the financial aid system that we currently have affect students who like are most like dependent on it, because like that's going to really affect what the point of college is, especially if we're talking about like upward mobility in the US.
Well, and especially since that is like so much of the stated purpose, right? Like, is that we're trying to facilitate this, and she like really hits on this a lot, as she's getting sort of to the end of the book, about the way in which it creates this, we have now this dynamic where you have like a lot of middle class families being like, well, okay, but we can't afford it either, and basically that like, yes, that there are like, ultimately the case that she builds to is like, this system is not actually helping the people who need it most. Like the sort of stated purpose of this system is not doing that, and that like higher education in the United States in a lot of ways just functions as a way of like the elite reasserting its status as elite, right? And that like actually it just should be free, and that like any conversation about changing the way that we do financial aid doesn't like, sure, cool, we can and should do things for like people currently in this in this situation, but like all you're going to do is create more people feeding themselves back into this sort of broken system, and like actually free college. It should be free. Part of how so the reason I ended up buying this book in the first place last year was that, we didn't do our little introductions.
Oh yeah. We can introduce ourselves.
You go first.
Hi, I'm Deboki. I usually post over on Okie Dokie Boki, and I'm a science writer. I work on videos for YouTube about the science. Yeah. And I do want to, like, I feel like I should issue this caveat that my entire life has been paid for almost entirely by like academia and by college as like an institution. Like my parents are professors, my husband is a professor. So like, I don't know if I feel like I should state that up front as like a conflict of interest.
My conflict of interest here is
Yes.
Deboki's owned by big academia.
It's true. It's true. Luckily, big academia can never get its shit together because it's made up of academics.
Hi, I'm Nicole Sweeney, and I realized this because I was about to talk about my job. So I'm a producer for Complexly, and we make educational YouTube videos. And we have this partnership that is like in sort of early stages now, but with Arizona State University. And last year, Hank mentioned reading this book in like sort of early stages, like while they were doing sort of negotiation stuff. I personally am not working on this like ASU project at all. However, one thing that I will say is like everything that I have learned on the periphery of watching that project happen has made me, I'm like a really big ASU fan now because as an institution, they seem to take their status as a public institution very, very seriously. And I don't know. But anyway, they launched a program a year ago, this year, I don't know, recently, where you can take, it's like online classes, but you pay $25 to enroll, and they're $400 classes total, but you only pay if you pass the class, which is like, and it's basically sort of speaking to this sort of very specific, anyway. So like it was in a larger conversation about this sort of model, about this idea of students going to school, this sort of true worst case scenario. Like I am sympathetic. I am obviously to all of the like student debt conversations as somebody who took out 6 figures of student loans to get my degrees. Like I get it, but also I have the degrees. So like actually the people who are in like greatest need, there are people who have mountains of student loan debt who don't have a degree. And it's like, the fact that we have allowed a system to like that actively encourages that, which again, I think is a thing that I don't think she ever explicitly says it, but like as you're sort of looping through these people's stories over and over again, it becomes really clear that like for the people who wind up in that situation, like how else was this meant to go? Like what else did you think was going to happen? They are not being set up to succeed in this system, but they're also being told, here, just borrow thousands of dollars, no big deal. Like bad. So anyway, yes. So that's this book. I think something else that I imagine that we will talk quite a bit about is like the approach, this like design, the way that this is structured. You mentioned a couple times like academic, like the way that she's sort of talking to and about other academics throughout. I find that super interesting. I think that like as a narrative choice in terms of like publishing this book, I think that like the way in which she picked a dozen students or whatever it was to like sort of closely follow and mirror. This is like not an uncommon approach to this kind of research, but I think it is like super effective because like this kind of thing is really, really hard to properly grasp when you're just talking in terms of like really large numbers of just like, well, this percentage of the population has debt but no degree or whatever, and this many thousands of people are in that situation, blah 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 blah, as opposed to like the very sort of concrete, like, okay, like here, this like this is like the flow, this is how you get from A to B. I just thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, it reminded me of like Eval Ewing's book, like the combination of like data and like anecdote and personal story. Not even anecdote, like personal story. Like kind of like having a narrative, not super narrative, but like pretty like you're following these students. Like I realized I was at a point where I was like, I'm like invested in this story. I want to know how this is going to go. Like I was like worried, like there was tension.
There are like
but,
specific
like,
students that I was like, okay, wait, but what happened? What happened?
Yeah.
How are they doing?
Yeah. And this is a weird thing, but I was thinking about it. There are some points where she could write these paragraphs where she's describing, like, say, a student's like feelings about like something, maybe like loans or something else, and she'll be describing them in terminology where like it's clear what she's doing is using the survey question, and it's like they somewhat thought that this thing, and they strongly agreed with this thing, and it's something that could have read really dry and weird, but like in the context of this book, like weirdly like actually came off not even just like okay, like it almost came off like conversational, which is not about the point of the book. That was just something I noticed where I was like, this is weirdly like adept at like turning survey answers into like making me feel like I'm actually like getting to know a person.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's the thing that I guess I was sort of getting at in terms of like I think that the book does a really effective job of translating the qualitative portions of its research. Like, I mean, like the larger research that they did was like a, you know, little bit of both, but it's really effective in the way that it communicates the qualitative parts of the research. And I think
so for people who didn't read the book, like she has like this data, like pretty like, you know, like quantitative kind of stuff describing certain aspects of like, you know, whatever point it is she's trying to make. But she also has like, I think like it's like 6 students that were like primarily following through the book, that she's like drawing on, and they're like from different walks of life, like different backgrounds, different colleges too, which I think is like really important. Like some are in like 2-year colleges, some are in 4-year, and so there's like different like approaches that ways to like kind of just like what their grants are, even what their grants and like other forms of employment are going to even look like, and so it like gives, and she chooses these examples. Like, it's clear why she's chosen these particular students, like to kind of balance each other out, like why she chose this group, because they have certain characteristics that like, whether that's race or like other forms of support or just other parts of their story where it's like clear where these different things kind of balance out. But because she's also showing the data, it never feels like these are like cherry picked kind of stories. And I think she talks about that too. Like it feels like, okay, this is about like taking what we see at a data level and then turning it into something that is like translated to an actual person's experience, like how that looks like for an actual person living what the numbers say.
Yeah. When she introduces them too, she's like, these are not exceptional. Like there are so many people in our data that like I could, you know, could have grabbed any number of other files from the research for this story and still, you know, produce kind of the same thing. And it's very good. Also, I will say I don't remember if it was Sophie or Chloe. Sophie and Chloe, I collapsed them into one person, but whichever one it was that sold her horse and then didn't get a degree. That one really hurt. She was the one that I kept keeping an eye on. And when she was like, yeah, well, when I talked to her in 2014 and she's in Florida, I'm like, no, but you sold your horse. It was your friend. You didn't even sell. You know, she sold it to the lower offer because she wanted her friend to go to a good home. Anyway, I'm really sad about that horse. That's also not the point of this book. But I'm sad about the girl who sold her horse.
Colleges, choices.
Okay, well, now that we've laid out what this book is, what the book's doing, I feel like that was the longest book summary that we have ever done. Because we were discussing it while we were summarizing. We're a little bit of both. I get where should we start?
I mean, there's plenty of places. Let's see. Sorry, my notes this time were just like me trying to like reiterate like what I had learned from this book, because I got to the end and I was like, I learned so much from like what feels like an otherwise breezy book. And then I went back to the beginning and was like looking through my notes, and I was like, I completely forgot reading this because I just like absorbed so much other information.
Right. It just like kept going.
Yes. Yeah.
Also, hi, hello.
Yes.
To the chat.
To statistics.
To statistics and Colby.
To all of statistics.
To all of statistics. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah. So I don't know, maybe one place is just like to start about like, I guess how muddied financial aid even is. Like we talked about this a little bit earlier, but like there are so many different forms of financial aid that like happen in this book that like you were kind of talking about like, oh right, like the way that you even think about what financial aid is like weird. So like one like really important distinction is like grants versus like the idea of actually like, which like feels like imaginary money that like is out there and does a thing, and it feels like it comes from nowhere and you're just like, cool, I got it. And then like the difference between that and like cash in hand, and like those are two different things, not just like on a technical level but like on an actual experience level, because so much of like what the cost of college is, and this is like really an important distinction through the book, is like not just like the tuition, it's like actually like what it costs to live and sustain yourself through college. And so I think that's like a thing that's like a thread through the book, is just just how convoluted financial aid is, because there's so many different ways to get it, and the ways that we define the cost of college are so confusing too. Because again, going back to the idea of like the cost of living in the area, one section that like really stood out to me is when she's talking about like the fact that colleges basically report what the cost of living in their area is, and they have every incentive to report that being low, because like they want to attract students, so they want to say like the cost of living is low, and then also like there's no like they might as well, and they don't want to like tell someone that they don't want to tell like whatever federal aid people that like, hey, it's actually super expensive to live here. So they will like estimate a lower cost, but then that screws over the students who actually have to pay whatever prices
have to like live actually, who have to do the actual living in this place. And your research is telling yes. I think it was like the two places that she gave as examples. One of them is DC, which is where I did my undergrad, and it was like the low end. Some schools reported as low as like $9,000, up to, I want to say it was like 25, 26, something like that. Like that was the range. And like it's a single city. Like it's not like I get that there are certain parts of the city that are more expensive than others, but like it's not, you're not going to see that big of a gap in the cost of living in DC if you go from one neighborhood to the other. So
and then like the weirdness of like estimating costs like even goes further. Like even if you are local and you're living at home, the way that we think about that as like a very one direction thing, where like you just somehow are taken care of, and there is nothing that like nothing else that happens. It's just you are at a home for free, and like there's no other cost. There's just like so many moments like that where it's like about just like the weirdness of like how we frame the way young people live these days and support their families or support themselves. That's like so out of step with like how at least like a certain group of policymakers seems to think about how people are living these days.
Yeah, to the point about the cost of college, something that she talks about a lot is the way in which it's also not just like the cost of supporting yourself, but also in a lot of ways like the opportunity cost. The time that you are spending in classes is time that you are not spent earning money, and that for most of the students that she was talking to, most of the students who got like the sort of the close-up profiles in this book, they actually have like effectively a negative family contribution, because these students are also like helping their families out. Like they are giving money to support their households, whereas the financial aid system treats that relationship as strictly one way, that money will only flow from parent to child, and not like, which again is like one of those things. It is an assumption that has like very disproportionate effects. That like that yes, in terms of like who that has consequences for. Yeah. Haven't read the book, but this sort of narrative approach to nonfiction books really allows the reader to also take an interest to learn the data behind it. Yes, yes, 100%. Yeah, all of the, again, like even this point about the idea that like, right, that level, like the sort of the negative cost, like that is a thing that is like a phrase that she uses a couple times throughout the book. But like it means something different, I think, in those. I mean, it means the same thing, right? But like it affects you differently, right? When there's like a very real person whose experience is being explained to you as like, okay, and then you know, she was driving, you know, after class an hour to this one job, and she would be there and then like send, you know, $100 a month back to parents or like whatever. All of that.
I think like one of the things that like this book was making me think about, in part because of the way that she was like sharing specific student stories, is the way that a lot of like the popular image of like college students these days are shaped by like wealthier liberal arts school students, which is not necessarily fair either. Like I feel like a lot of those portrayals aren't fair to them as students either. But I think one of the, like there's a point where she talks about this like really super influential study called Academically Adrift, that's about how students spend their time. And the argument that this, like the study puts forth is like students spend more time on other things other than studying.
Around, basically.
Yeah, and I wrote in my notes like maybe we're just smarter than for the previous.
You guys need to just study more. Wow.
But also like the point she makes, like on a less like defensive note, she like points out that that study has been used specifically to like argue against financial aid, because people are like, well, why should we pay for students to go to college and they don't value it? But that study doesn't say anything at all about like financial aid. There's nothing that you can really glean from that study as it's done that says anything about students who are on financial aid not spending their time studying or anything. And if anything, a lot of what her work, and that's why to me, like the fact that this is so focused not just on financial aid, but students who have the most need of financial aid is super, super important, because I think like it's really reiterating like, you know, the ways that people are spending their time. And I think in her choice of students, she's also not necessarily choosing students who make great decisions all the time. Like I think like it's very upfront about like there are students who make pretty bad choices, who make mistakes in their personal life that like translate over into their academic success. So the point is not to be like, oh, like you need to be virtuous to deserve a college education or anything like that. It's just like the reality of what we're setting students up for is like so like unfair and just like not based in actual kind of the reality of like what people at least in like this era of schooling we're like dealing with.
Yeah, and like, and I mean, even like the making of bad choices, right? There is just so much less room to like flexibility to have that happen. And like even like there's the main example that she uses of this, Tyler, I think is his name, or his name in the book, I guess. I don't know. Like describing this kid who like he got in trouble and whatever, and like that in like the interviews and people in his life were like, oh, you seem to like keep getting out of things or whatever, but like I don't know, it still seemed like he still like there were still just a lot of like pretty serious financial consequences in terms of like serious in like proportional terms, I guess most particularly, right, like relative to his ability to manage them and like deal with those, like the implications of all of that. I don't know, like being in the white middle class liberal arts group that like is, you know, sort of like that former group, I'm just like, even reading that, I'm like, I don't feel like he's getting out of things, so, like relative to my peers in like that, I'm still not feeling like he's getting out of stuff super easy or whatever.
Yeah. So we have this question about like how does she make the argument for bad information, bad choices on page 185, and it's like a very specific section. So I don't know like how to like talk about how she makes that argument, but one of the things that she talks about in that section, like she has this quote, and I underlined something that Tyler specifically told her. Like Tyler, the student, like had started off school feeling like it was actually pretty easy, but then over time, because of advising issues, like he was having a harder time making decisions. Like he had an advisor who kept giving him like suggestions for the wrong classes. I mean, he kind of becomes increasingly cynical. And there's this line that I like underlined: "Don't let anyone tell you different. It's just going to get worse. This economy, and it's going to make finding a job even harder." And again, this is like right after the recession, and I was like, he's not wrong.
He's not wrong.
It made me think a little bit. Because one of the things that I felt kind of going in, and it's like part of my own like stupid kind of like bougie angst, is sort of like, what is the point of college? And there in this book, she's not making that argument at all. Like there is nothing, like if anything, the assumption in this book is that there is a clear point to college, that it is about like this very clear ability to like advance further, to be able to get jobs. And like one of the things that this book would not answer, but I'm still trying to kind of like reconcile, is like, to what extent is it like, do we value college because it provides people with an education, but versus like, to what extent do we like create like this system where people need to go to college to have advance? Because that's something I've been wondering just more in general, like what is the point of college? But also like, I don't know, and like this is also because again, like I grew up in an academic family. Like genuinely, to me, like I kind of assumed everyone went to college, and it was like for me like a big sort of like, oh right, you are like very sheltered and cloistered and only like know a handful of people, before I realized that like also like not everyone goes to grad school either, like just because that was like the world I grew up in. And so I know that some of my cynicism is like really just like a knee-jerk response to that, but also like in the context of this book, like the students here all see a very clear purpose to college. Like they do have like a very clear insight into like I was thinking about Nima, who's like this graphic design student. She's like, she sees like this as her opportunity to like get a certain type of career. Yeah, it was like a
She would be so sad. I'm so sad.
I know. But like, yeah, like just kind of like we clearly have created, like we clearly are at a point where college is like very essential to most people. Like you're going to have a better chance of getting a job if you have college. But also like, again, thinking about like that like middle class liberal arts kind of like more elite institution, there's all these arguments about like, oh, should you be doing a humanities major versus a STEM major? Like the STEM major is going to be the one that's going to get you a job. But then it's like, well, like if the point of college is like more like the education, like doesn't matter. Like, I don't know. Sorry, I don't have like a specific direction. It's just like a general sense of like, what is the point of college? And then like, so then how do we think about like the fairness of paying for it as a result? Because if we're going to like clearly live in this world where we need college, how do we both make college better and make it more affordable and not make it this like absolute shit show to go to?
We always need to include a bare minimum of one like existential crisis that the books that we read gave us. So thank you for
yeah.
What is the point? What is the point of college? Which, you know. I mean, yes, and that's I don't have particularly great answers, but like, you know, at the end of the book, she talks a lot about how the implications that college education has for social mobility are like pretty significant. And if that's the way, if that's the society that we're going to live in, then like we need to make that possible. And
also like I want to be clear also, like I think that the education that college provides is essential to like society as a whole. Like I think the training is like super important. The thing I just always wonder about is like what, maybe it's less about what the point of college is, it's like what is the point of the way that we value college, especially like elite institutions versus public institutions. Like they're all in education. The value that you get in an elite institution is often, I think, this is anecdotal, but like less about the coursework and more about the access to like certain people, whether that's in your student class who will be your alumni network going forward, or like the professors and all of that other stuff.
Yeah, all of that stuff is absolutely a way, a means of like undemocratizing the idea of education, like that. Like that is truly, it is a matter of like of reinforcing existing social class structures, and like reasserting that, like that as a thing. I read a thread on Twitter yesterday. This guy was talking about gifted programs, and basically just the ways in
Twitter's
which they
favorite
are.
subject.
Yes, Twitter loves to talk about them, but about how just how like inherently like classist and racist most of them are. The guy who was writing the thread is a Black man, and he was talking about how like the process by which he was put into the program like involved just a whole battery of tests, and he was accused of cheating on the tests because he did so well on them. And then finally they were like, oh, okay, I guess like you did well on them. And so then like he was, I don't know, in middle school, I think, at this time, and then proceeded to be in all of the like advanced classes where he was the only Black kid for like the rest of his schooling. And at some point when all of his friends started talking about the SAT, he was like, yeah, we're kind of at an advantage because of all the tests we had to take to get into this. And his peers were like, no, my mom just called the school and that's how I got put in here. So yes, all of that leading to the elitism in the way that we look at and talk about universities is very much the same thing. And that's like, that's like a whole separate, I don't know, that's like a whole other can of worms that I don't think that the financial aid system or even any discussion of free college will do anything to sort of address. Although it is interesting, this was like sort of a anecdotal like aside that she mentioned, but that when like free high school was a thing, that like people were like, oh, this is a way that you're gonna like rob the poor to pay the rich, which I thought I was not aware that like that discourse had existed, but is super interesting because that is something that like comes up a lot in the like when you throw out the idea of like, oh, like free college, that like, oh well, rich people can go to college for free too, but like okay, fine. Rich people drive on roads too. Like, I don't know. That's not like public goods. It doesn't work that way actually. And like the systems, rich people will find their own other ways to reassert.
Harvard's still gonna exist.
Yes. Yes. Rich people are still going to be rich, and like they'll have other means by which they can, remind everybody that they're rich, I guess. But like that is not a compelling argument against public goods. Anyway.
Yeah, I think the information thing you were saying, like that's obviously not quite financially related, but I was thinking about it in the context of the financial aid system as she's describing it, because there is this clear issue also of what information is available to students and like how easy is it for students to navigate the system. Like there's a lot of students who didn't know they had to like reapply, like they had to refill out their FAFSAs. A lot of the regulations around the financial aid are unclear. And then if their parents get a job that pays them more, like there's weird ambiguities and like perverse incentives there that like really like almost punish them for like succeeding, but like not enough, but like the system's not going to take that into account. And then there's this like really like sad story of like this one student who didn't realize that like as a full-time student she wasn't eligible to like live in the housing that she had, like a subsidized housing with her mom, like but it's like this really arbitrary thing, and there's like no one there to like help her navigate that either. And, like,
and then the rule randomly changes, and she's like, well, after what happened before, I don't trust you. Like you're telling me I can go
and it's for something like it's
full-time now, but I don't know, seems sus because I don't really know what the fuck is going on. All of this is like so opaque, and I don't know. So I guess I'm just going to stay part-time now.
Like for something, especially for something like housing, like I feel like losing your housing is like a very scary like thing to have to deal with in the middle of like also trying to work and go to school, in her case taking care of her mom who's really sick. Like like
I mean, and like the relationship to housing and education still also goes back to everything that you were saying too about like the idea of living at home and like living students who live with their parents, and like what that means and the ways in which that sort of inadvertently not inadvertently, the ways in which that like penalizes student aid numbers, like the suggestion like that your costs are somehow lower, like it's not, it doesn't necessarily work that way. At least not for all students. And like the way in which these forms are structured, you are not capturing that. And this matters because it has like the people who are most affected by this are the people, again, with the greatest need, like that, like fucking up those calculations, like not taking all of those things into account fully, has like greater consequences for the people who need it most. The people for whom like living at home, the students that have this sort of like negative family contribution situation, are like much, I think the adverse impact on them of saying that, oh, actually your college cost is like $3,000 less because you live with your parents, is probably greater than the boon to students who have the sort of presumed one-way relationship, to telling those students, like, if you sort of flip this, right? If you say like, okay, what if we do it the other way around, right? Like then you have the sort of I don't know, whatever, unfair corollary. The win, the hypothetical win of telling that student that like, oh, actually your cost of attendance is $3,000 more than what we estimated, now that we're not deducting you living at home, like that, when you like actually like weigh that out, it doesn't make sense to me to treat it the way that we do, because I don't know, I'm not explaining this well, because I'm so flustered and frustrated.
I mean, I think that's like a lot of what this book is like. We're like, I had moments where I was trying to piece together like different things that were going on, and I was like, this is like very like this doesn't make sense. And I was like, oh right, that's the point, is that this doesn't make sense. Like this doesn't make sense. Like the system is full of things that like don't make sense, because it's driven by like really antiquated views of like what college students look like and like what their lives are like. And I think like one of the reasons why I'm like I feel like the 2008 part of it is like super important is it also affected like the students. Like one of the ideas is like, oh, you should be able to pay your way to go through college too. But like a lot of the students, like they do have jobs and they're working these really tough hours. Like they're working all night, some of them are like working all night, drinking coffee and going to class in the morning, like super tough. But also because it's 2008, like where are the jobs? Like what kind of jobs are like people like actually expecting students to find? And like there's some students who talk about like how they were able to find a job, but then their hours started getting cut, like all of this stuff was like, is happening. I was thinking about it because like I know like some of my parents' students, like they work like in healthcare, and so like especially in the past year, like I get like like balancing, like having that, like it's always probably really tough to balance that kind of job. And then you throw in like a pandemic, like the next version of this is going to look also incredibly catastrophic for students, I assume. So I don't know.
Not only having their hours cut too, but also just like the ways in which the kinds of jobs that were available to them, the kinds of part-time work that they could take, also created this dynamic of like you just have to be permanently available, and like whenever we say, and we're not going to tell you more than like the week in advance or whatever. Yes.
One of the like I think kind of like enduring points from this book is basically like if you give students more money, they will probably benefit. Like there's like it's not like a strict one-to-one. Like it's a much more nuanced and
she adds a lot of asterisks to that idea,
but like one of the ways is like students who like received this Wisconsin Scholar Fund grant, like they were able to take on like fewer work hours. Like I feel like that's like a pretty clear kind of like advantage. But there are like trade-offs. And then one of the students, Norbert, who's from the Oneida tribe, she kind of uses him as a thread and like example of someone who received a lot of additional support from, I think his tribe had like a scholarship that they hadn't been able to start up recently because of like I think they had like recently been able to like start up some casinos and stuff and had a lot more success there. And so they set up the scholarship grant, and he's like benefited from this. So it's like all of these things that like downstream like benefited him, and like how he kind of saw that and how that like helped him both like just like on a personal level, and then also clearly on an academic and professional level.
He also had like extended family too that was like different, had like access to, like, while his
Yeah.
immediate family looked in a lot of ways similar to the other people, he
Mhm.
had an extended family that was a little, that was like, I don't know, that was different in terms of like, you know, college
Yeah.
graduates. Like he and his brother, he had an older brother who was
Yeah.
in school too, and so like his brother and him were going to be like first college graduates in like immediate
Yeah.
family, but they had extended family.
Yeah.
And so like that, but yes, like the downstream effects, the ways
Yeah.
in which all of those things become cumulative in their impacts on, you know, like your ability to focus. And there was some stuff too about the way that like work study worked, that
Yeah.
also on the list of things that I was like,
Yeah.
this is like interesting and is new and is like confusing to me. Also,
Yeah.
again, like as somebody who had a lot of work study jobs, but like, and this is the other thing too that like is maddening about it, right? Like I think about it and I'm like, yes, here, like these are the jobs that I had in college. They were,
Yeah.
most of them, they're all of the like my like the paid work that I did in college was for the universities that I attended,
Yeah.
right? Like that's,
Yeah.
and so I don't know, like when you go to your boss who's in the history department and say I have an exam this week, they're like, oh, okay, you don't come
Yeah.
in, like go do your exam, right? As opposed to like
Yeah.
your boss at fucking PetSmart, who's like, I do not
Yeah.
give a shit that you have an exam
Yeah.
this week. You are
Yeah.
scheduled. I don't know the implications of that, but also just like the funding, like the way that the funding worked was interesting to me as like
Yeah.
a thing that I had never, I don't know, just like
Oh,
was
right.
not
Yeah.
aware of.
Yeah.
But I also wonder how much of that is also related to another sort of complicated money, whatever, another way that all of this gets messy and convoluted. But I'm not clear on how much of the like cost offset could also come from like other, if the university has more money, because basically she described a
Mm.
situation where like students would
Yeah.
get work study grants, but basically once the like the grant ran out, once the amount, like the degree to which that employee, that student employee was being subsidized, like maxed out, university departments who like couldn't really afford to like pay for the full, like they could
Yeah.
afford to pay the little their share of a subsidized employee, but like once they had like reached the end of their subsidy, they'd be like, okay, cool, we can't like afford to pay for you anymore. I
Yeah.
don't know, I that was interesting to me because it was
Yeah.
also not something that I had encountered in my
Huh.
experience with work study.
Huh.
And so
Yeah.
I don't know, that's another one of those things where it's like, oh, I mean, the only logical explanation is that like it was just the like the university itself had more money, and so,
Yeah.
you know, once the work study grant ran out, they just kept paying us, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, I don't remember enough about that section to feel like I could offer my interpretation, because it was, again, the same where I was like, right, okay, I'm trying to make sense of this situation where I feel like ultimately the point is that it doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was just stuff like that, like the like I like tripped over because I was like, I couldn't like separate out, you know, like here is my
Yeah.
actual experience that I have with this like institution, this thing. Well, that's the other thing that was just so interesting about like this whole book, right? Is like the ways in which she is describing you know, like universities and like financial aid and like stuff that I'm like, yes, I interface with all of these things, but it was very different.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, yeah. Anecdotal. This is also not. This is a complete transition segue aside and not even into like a real discussion thing, but earlier you mentioned academically adrift, and that was one of my
Mm.
favorite sections of the book because it is clear how much she hates that
Yes.
book, and there was
I
just
love
so much of this like casual, you know, like they this whole book is, its tone is consistently very like professional and academic in nature, but like
Yeah.
I don't know, to the degree that you can as an academic, like throw in a, you know, bless her heart, like
Yeah.
type
Yeah. Yeah.
energy. She did it
Yeah.
through all the pages where she was discussing academically adrift. And I just really enjoyed how much she hates
Yeah.
that study.
Yeah. I love like academic, like like, I was gonna say passive aggressiveness. I don't even know if it's really that passive. It's like very upfront, but I love when academics hate things. It's so much fun. Like the like impolite ways to like express your criticism.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
There's a bit where she's talking to the point that you raised, the sort of really fundamental criticism of that study is, like the fact that they were not engaging with financial aid at all, like, and with need as a component of how they were looking at students. And there's when she talks about that, there's a bit where she says something to the effect of, like, if we are using this to affect financial aid programs, like, that seems really fucking irresponsible. I mean, like, she obviously, I'm paraphrasing, but like only a little, like only a little.
It's just a word. And it was there. Like the word was there. It's just like, yeah. I think like I'm sorry that I'm like hung up on this like liberal student, because that's like not the point of this book, but like that contempt for students. Because I was thinking about this because I was watching The Chair, like, and I could not get past a few episodes. It's fine, it's not terrible, but like I like am increasingly like kind of bored of like that kind of like lazy contempt for college students, because it's like at the end of the day, we're all done when we're 18. Like I just kind of like feel like there are older college students, but like in general, like at that age.
That's the thing too, like, why I was getting so hung up on the Tyler thing, the thing about Tyler being like, oh, you keep getting out of stuff, where I was just like, no, like compared to the other students in this sample, maybe that's true, but
compared to like the students that I like have seen like fully like vandalize this like school property and have no consequences.
Sorry. Anyway,
no. I'm just thinking about like kind of like that weird like sense of like contempt that people have for students, and like one of the like this is another incoherent thread that I felt throughout this book. That's like sort of like the weirdness of like the ways that we both treat college students like they're babies, and then also expect them to be fully adults. And it's really more like, no, this is like a specific stage where you are like both, in my eyes at least, where, and like this comes up in a lot of different ways to me. Like it's sort of related to like the expectation of like your family's going to take care of you, but also that it's like this one direction thing, and no sense of like, actually, no, there are college students who are going to have to take care of their families as well, either financially, emotionally, physically, like all combination of all three. And then like how that translates over into like very like lazy critiques of people who are like relying on this kind of support, and like and when I say lazy, I mean both that the critiques are lazy and the critiques of the people as being lazy, when it's like really like, we all know that college is obscenely expensive, and also that the ways that we can pay for it are still going to vary a lot depending on what other resources you have. Like college was difficult for like my family to pay for as well, but like I didn't like have to contend with a lot of the challenges we had, like the students in these books have, which is partly because colleges know that they're super expensive and will like subsidize like their professors' kids,
right?
Part of their school. Like that was like one of the perks of being a professor. So it's like it's just like, it's just like that sense of like, I feel like we don't like know how to like treat people in this age group, which sort of makes sense. Like it is, because it is like both and neither, but also like it varies so much too, depending on other factors. I was thinking about it because when my parents went to college in India, like you don't leave your parents' home. And so when I went to college, like this was like a thing of like, oh, why are you, like I didn't even go that far. Like I was like about like 40 minutes away, but it was still like, oh, like why are you leaving home? We didn't leave home. And that's like a very clear cultural difference. Like that's a very clear like America versus like at least a lot of South Asian families, like how people think of leaving home as an adult. So there's like sort of like that weirdness of like expecting people to be so dependent, but also so independent, and just like not knowing how to reconcile those.
It's like the way in which those things appear are selectively applied to like disadvantage your perception of these students. Like that's the thing about it. It's like if you were consistently okay, if you're gonna say, okay, they're adults, then I don't know, man, why do they gotta fucking track down their parents' social security numbers in order to determine their financial aid eligibility? It's like the way in which that like it is weird because it is a sort of like in between stage, and like in that respect I get it, but it is also very frustrating when it feels like people are consistently making whichever choice, choosing to use whichever lens is the least generous to be looking at them with, and that is frustrating. I don't like it.
That's why I try not to talk shit about college students anymore.
Yeah, they're just, when I think about myself at 18, 19, 20, oh my God, it's not,
I was like reading this book and I was like, oh man, I was an idiot.
I just, anything else? Any other? I mean, yes, there's lots of other things, but we're getting close to the hour here, so or do we want to just do, I guess, okay, so this is now we're final thoughts time. So if there are any questions, if you have any questions or anything that we didn't get to that you think we should get to, let us know in the chat. And then while we are saying whether or not we liked the book, that's what we're supposed to do in our final thoughts and stuff.
Maybe, so I think at this point it's clear we like the book.
What?
Right. I think I assume you like the book.
Yes.
Yeah. I think this has become like our recurring theme lately, is like every time we're like, oh yeah, so we really like the book, right?
Yeah.
We should start being like, what is like a thing that you really liked about the book? Maybe we should start doing that.
Key takeaway. What was or like a favorite thing in the book. If you had to pick one, I already said the thing about academically adrift. I feel like I have to pick a different one, but because really the answer is that. That was my favorite part of the book, by far.
I guess also I'll start with something that I think is maybe less about the book, but just more about how it fits with our reading overall and like stuff we've read. I think oh, sorry.
No, I'm excited.
I really liked reading something that was like a little bit more of a study, because I think we did that with like Ewing's book, but we haven't done like a study kind of book in a while. And I am not like super great at the social sciences, so I had a lot of like turning to my partner to be like, can you explain like something about the way that she is like described? It's usually not like, can you explain like this section? It's like there's like a certain mode of thinking that it's like I like don't fully like appreciate. So that was something that I really appreciated about reading this book. And I like definitely want to go back. I like sort of started doing the reread and started going through the graphs to feel like, okay, like do I buy like all of the quantitative arguments being made? Like how does the graph support them? I appreciated that the book had those included as well. I guess because it's written in a pretty academic, I don't want to say fully academic way, because there is clearly like her in the book. So I don't know if that's normal or not for this kind of book, but like I appreciated it overall, this like combination and how it fits in with our reading.
Yeah. Yes. I think I agree with all of that. Hadn't really thought about it in those terms, but yeah, it feels like the last, I think 2 books that I picked were weird. I had to really, this was me being like, okay, I'm doing it. This is a very standard social science book. That's like straight up, I did it. So
and it was great.
I said I was going to pick something else besides academically adrift, but I lied. I'm not going to pick another thing.
No, that's fine. We love a petty academic moment.
I really do. I really love a petty academic moment,
Cool.
So
the,
next time,
Yeah. So this is one of those things where it's like a book that I've had on my shelf, because that's how we do this most of the time now. And so what we're going to read next month is Reader Come Home, The Reading Brain in a Digital World by Mary Ann Wolfe. There's my camera. So again, I've had this book on my shelf for a while, and I think I've kind of like put off reading it because I think it's like a very like neuroscience-y kind of heavy book, looking at like how we read, but also how that's changed with like more digital stuff. And because like neuroscience is like not my strongest suit and is also like so easy to sort of like, I don't know, turn into weird things in popular science kind of writing. I'm always like a little bit uncertain of how I want to take that in. And then especially with a book that's like going to be about like things changing in a digital world, I'm like a little bit unsure, but I thought this would be like the right like environment to read it in, because maybe it'll be super awesome, or maybe it'll be good but we'll have quibbles. But yeah, I felt like this would be, sorry, I will hold it up steadily so you guys can see the cover, so that I can finally read it and see if I agree with how it talks about reading, because even if I'm like unsure how to take it all in, I'm also very curious about what it's like to be in your brain when you're reading.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I'm very excited. I hope that you guys are also excited and will join us next month on Deboki's channel when we talk about that book. And thank you for joining us this time.
Yes.
Okay. Bye.